What's up, future Shredlords? Welcome back to After the Fingers. We're going to look at some of these chord revelations now with this piece of software, which is quite nice in the sense that it lets me sort of play the keyboard and show you these basic principles, how they break down on the actual fretboard. So we're going to start off here with this C major chord here, right? Now you can see that's basically the C-type chord, right? You can keep going. Now there it is in its entirety, plus you also see this D type up here. There's the inversion. And there's the root inversion. So that's step number one, is just starting to break down these caged chords. So like in this instance, you know, that's the root inversion of the C type, right? And then you're like, okay, that's got to be the first inversion. So you start to see that one there. That's paired up often with the A type and whatnot. There's also the top end of the C or the D chord, right? So that right there is incredibly important. You keep going. Well, now you're seeing the arpeggio there, essentially on two strings, right? You can also see it as this one. Right, the actual two string with two notes on every string, right? Essentially, we've looked at that many times. That one there is the C major 7. And the third inversion, of course, starting on this B, here's the 7th degree. Moving to the 1st degree, moving to the 3rd degree, and the 5th degree of the actual C major scale. So that there, it becomes incredibly important information. I think people skip over that, and that's why they struggle later on, is because that foundational stuff is really just, it's not there. And unfortunately, to sort of really unleash your full potential, you need to know that stuff. The next one is obviously this idea where you're combining these intervals. Now you can kind of see them on the fretboard there. There's the difference between a major and a minor third. I'm doing them on the top two strings, right? This distance. Very important to start to see things like that, right? Otherwise you start to run into an issue. And obviously if you're doing on the B and the G string, that's one that gets everybody there. Essentially this idea that you're going to switch over to what looks like a fourth normally, but now it's a major third, you know, if you wanted a minor third kind of situation. Now obviously I can't do it there. I'd have to do it higher up on the fretboard. Like that, right, to essentially get this simulated minor third feel. But I think you're getting the point here. You got to be able to sort of climb up with these thirds. And then you're like, okay, I'm going to jump down here. You got the next one. Sorry, you got the next one there, right? Jump down again, right? Now there, I'm doing it basically on two strings, or on one string. See that? Now that's just the way the software works, but my point being here is actually I was thinking about this. This is incredibly important. You should know, obviously, when you're doing it on just one string and then across two strings, the difference between something like this, where I'm doing it across two strings, and the other one where I'm like, just on one string, okay? That's a minor interval. Obviously, if I were to increase it to the major one, there I go, that extra step. Knowing that information on the actual fretboard, how many frets is that? Here's the starting position. I want to go up a minor third. To get that sound, how many frets do I have to go up? Can you just feel it on the fretboard, or do you actually know the number if you want a major? Watch when I go to a fourth. Across two strings, 5th. Right, there's your classic open power chord. The 6th, right? The the 7th, and your octave. Those intervals basically form the entire language with respect to all of our music. And so at first you're like, well, you know, it's no big deal, but you start putting those together in combinations and it just starts filling up essentially the board massively, right? So that's really important. The idea that you can start to envision these intervals moving and then connect them together, right? There's 1, 3, 5, 7 in the open position there, right? The C major 7, C, E, G, and B. Look, adding the half step in there, and if I were to make it sound more like a guitar, or maybe adding in the 9. Now that's the difference with the keyboard. I can kind of make the entire chord. So you get that overlapping, if you will, but in a real guitar situation, I gotta release that B there, obviously, so I can get up. Unless I want to do the open B and sneak in there again with the high E, you know what I mean? So that's another sort of consideration. Sometimes you gotta come up with some hacks and whatnot, but at the end of the day, you're good to go. And that's really, again, that important information. You're like, there's the first note of the scale, there's the third note, the fifth note, the seventh note, and then of course the 9. Which one was that? 11 and the 13, right? Like those sounds basically have to be burned in your mind. And if you do these, you can kind of move your hand so you get this. So you may not be able to hold down necessarily the strings, but now you can create essentially arpeggios, and that's also incredibly useful. And of course, I'm showing some limitations here, obviously, with the software. You can do things like that once you start factoring in 6 strings and you make a few alterations, if you will, with respect to how the chord voicing is. And that's another big one. When you look at the E-type chords and the A-type chords, they're not real sort of like full triads. The first little chunk there is the first note moving to the 5th note. So that's not really part of any triad. We always go 1, 3, 5, and then it's 3, 5, 1, and then it's 5, 1, 3. So there's no point where we kind of go 1, 5. But of course, when you start to factor in the idea of spread triads, you're doing 1, 5, and then 3 later on. So you'd be like, well, now all of a sudden, again, very useful tool, right? Okay, now all of a sudden you're starting to see, you can see me. There's one of those intervals. There's another one. So you see a minor third here, the E minor third interval stacked on top of the C major interval. And that's another big point I was trying to make, is just this shape alone on these strings, and that stacked with this one here, or this one, which makes more sense, obviously. You could be maybe higher, I don't know. Yep. Another interesting sound, right? But now you see the possibility there. You don't necessarily need to know the chord per se. Instead, you can start to hear these sounds. Maybe. small variations, essentially climbing down the fretboard there. Now, I wasn't really paying attention that much, but you get the idea. I'm sort of just layering these sounds based on the intervals. That'd be the first section then. Now that would be 2 individual notes, right? Next one. Again, those 2 there on the inside. Now that's something I like to do when I get into these more dense chords on the guitar itself. Where I can now add in the lower interval later on. So I kind of create the shell of the chord rather than try to actually play that all as one shot. I'll break it down. You see what I mean? I can use those individual notes, if you will. Again, these outside color tones, or of course the diatonic scale positions for, you know, 9ths and 11ths and 13ths and just 1, 3, 5, 7ths to flesh out the totality of the chord movement. It doesn't always have to be everything played at once like it is on the keyboard. Obviously, I'm just doing that to sort of illustrate these ideas where you have the minor third stacked on top of a major third somewhere else, right? Or maybe minor over minor, which of course is going to be a little weird. Now there's one where I'm throwing in the 5th now. Basically your C major in kind of a weird inversion, if you will. So that again sort of really helps out to be able to break down certain walls where you don't need to be the theory expert. Instead, just be like, I'm going to start off with this one interval here. And I want to add another one here. So maybe it's... So now you've got that kind of a voicing. Now obviously I can't do that one. Gotta add in this high E. Maybe the F. The G's nice too. Going down. That's a pretty nice chord there, basically over the C, right? Now that sounds a lot more interesting than just your standard C chord. You know what I mean? And there it is. You're starting to see that you can stack these intervals on top of each other and come up with much better results by just sort of expanding out each note section. The other one is, of course, is this idea that you're going to now, again, arpeggiate your ideas. So I can now have this sort of spread triad feel where I'm using this 5th interval, right? Again, notice that interval structure there. Instead of having the traditional 5th, you know, where you'd have... There's another one. When you're looking at it now on the B and the G string. Okay, this is turning into a train wreck. Another one, I guess. Ooh, diminished there. Notice that one. The diminished interval. All right, there's your traditional 5th, right? So that's one there. Or I guess I was doing it somewhere else now. Oh, there it is. Right, so I think you get the idea. These are all 5ths, basically, right? There's another one. Another one. Another one. Another one. Now, obviously, the diminished there, we call that a diminished 5th. Don't shoot the messenger, right? But again, you can see me basically doing it in the open position all the time. So you're just borrowing from that. And your chord progressions will sound that much better, obviously. Again, the idea of the intervals there. Right there, which one's that? Minor 3rd, right? Perfect 5th. So now you've got, you can go, or probably be more appropriate there, but you get the idea. This is going to make your life way easier because then you can start messing with them. Sixth and a third there. That's killer. Come on. Maybe up to the fifth. Again, more of a suspended flavor. But notice all I'm doing there is taking this sixth interval from essentially the, you know, in this case it looks like C, right? Obviously. And then just lowering the third on there, or the fifth here. Open position. Adding in the fifth. If you could actually reach that one, that might be tricky for most people, right? You could probably do the B there. Come on, that sounds awesome, right? Now it's a little bit more tricky there where you're doing the sort of inverted sixths kind of vibe there. So, I mean, the concept of chords shouldn't just be like, oh, learn this, you know, this triad here, and then do this inversion, and then this one, and then this one, and then move to the next caged chord and be like, do those all over the place. It should be more about, okay, this first one here, I've got this major third and this minor third. And if I do these two, I get the fifth. Well, that right there is way more important, obviously, because you can be like, I can take this third here, and I can take this sixth here. Now, that's a lot more interesting than just, or it could be a passing tone, right? Another one I think is no, I can't really tell. I think it is okay there. Actually, it looks like it looks on the third note there. The third string, I should say. The open G. Can't really tell, I'm sitting farther away. Right, so, but there's another great one. Obviously the C major at 9. Now there's the next one. The C major triad, not with the 7, but the 9 now. Right? In this case, the D. Now listen, I get it. People are like, how come you always just keep talking about the major scale? Every time I see the 1 chord, the 4 chord, or the 5 chord, I see them all as 1 chords. Now that might really mess with you, but it's in certain instances when I want to think about them as the Lydian mode or Mixolydian. So my default position is everything is just major, just like everything that is on 2 and 3 and 6 is minor. Right? So that's going to be the Aeolian position. And then sometimes I think about it in terms of Dorian or Phrygian. So it just keeps my life easy. And once you start thinking like that, you can organize all of this information so that when you're moving around, you actually know how the music structure in and of itself works. And then just make alterations as necessary. Because most of the time people are going to be like, oh yeah, the Mixolydian mode, it's, you know, with the flattened 7th, which is true when you're talking about the mode, but it's not necessarily true when you're talking about just starting on a C major scale from the note G. You know what I mean? It's kind of different. It's like this. And then you have four, of course. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7. The C Mixolydian, right? C major, C Mixolydian. So you see that little alteration there, that's really the sort of the magic note, if you will, which gives you this dominant 7 flavor. I don't even know if that's showing up there properly. No, it's doing it across those ones. I'd have to move them down. That's pretty badass, actually, but wrong one. So, again, still doesn't want to do it there. Maybe this. There we go. So, again, still doesn't want to do it. I'd have to move it again. Maybe this one. Or pretty cool one there. You know, obviously there's limitations here, so to speak, with the keyboards, but I think you get the point. You can find variations or just build those chords in their skeletons, and honestly that is way more preferable than just trying to memorize a bunch of chord shapes. Instead, play the first note, the next one, the next one, and then the next one. And then be like, I want the next one. I want minor 7. I want dominant 7. Or minor 7 flat 5. Those sounds matter way more. And you have to be able to construct them using intervals. Now that note right there, right? Have to move it up here, right? Which is going to be, sorry, what is this? So there's a proper voicing, if you will, of that diminished flavor. I see that these inside ones, it just doesn't like it. Come on, that's killer, right? And that's really the beauty of it, with just, you know, playing to the open position and then just adding a half step up. You can create a lot of really interesting sounds and chord progressions using these types of ideas where you're just stacking the intervals in and of themselves, which is going to be the most key component, obviously. And that right there is just kind of the training platform, combining these intervals in ways that make sense, where you're using a 6th as your bass. And you're like, there's the first one, obviously, and then maybe... Now, obviously, that one's not going to fly too well. That one's better, maybe. Another pretty fancy version of it. So... you get the idea here. It's up to you to basically see the limitations of these positions and move through each one of them, right? So you keep going up. So don't get confused there, that double dot. That's the 9th fret, I'm pretty sure. Wait, 7th, sorry. It's the 7th fret. It's weird looking at it, man, because honestly the frets just, they all look the same size, but I'm just getting bugged out here. So that essential information, I hope it helps to a certain degree, where you're starting to see how to combine intervals together. Now, obviously, it doesn't quite have the same flair when, you know, I'm trying to exaggerate just the sort of finger picking situation when you're sort of doing it more normal, right? And this is obviously where some effects can come in pretty handily, so don't be shy about basically going out there and just getting something that's simple. You can just sit there with headphones on and sit there. Just let that sound roll over you. Oh, here's when I do it as a major chord. Here's when it's the major 7. Here's the major add 9. Right, so maybe add the B up there, can we? You're like, well, how do you do that? You can notice that that one, the G there essentially is in the open position, right? So it's a bit of a stretch for sure, but you can do stuff like that to maybe tricky on the visual there, but trust me, you can stretch your fingers out. Now, obviously, don't do anything that's going to hurt you or anything else. You don't need to go for that super high extension, or you can just slide up there kind of thing. Think outside the box. The important part is obviously take this sort of simple information and expand what you can do with it, right? Thanks for joining me. Appreciate every single one of you. I hope that this helps in some degree. I wish you all the best in your practice exercises. Just keep your nose to the grindstone and try to be creative and absorb this information and put it to use. Don't just absorb licks and tricks and videos. Try to really figure this stuff out on the fretboard and be like, there's a major third, there's a minor third, perfect fifth, perfect fourth, major sixth, seventh, the octave, going beyond the 10th, the 11th, the 13th, adding them as extensions, you know, playing a root triad and then adding on the 13. Can be a very powerful tool under your belt. So we'll see you in the next one.